The nature of my presentation today is I've only got really a couple of slides to share with you. It's not very many slides, but really what I wanted to talk about is what we as L&D professionals or consultants or practitioners need to be doing to start to help to realize the value that learning can bring. And that might sound like a mouthful, and in many respects, it is a mouthful. But I think what is absolutely key is that it's no good being able to measure the impact of learning really effectively. It's no good to be able to design fantastic learning interventions. It's no good being able to get access to resources to deliver fantastic training inside our organization if we are not developing and deploying the right kind of training in the right kind of way. So really, that's what my presentation focuses on today, looking at some of the intricacies around developing those key relationships with business, overcoming those barriers to developing those strong partnering relationships with the line clients that we serve. So in many respects, my presentation today is building on previous work that I have done and previous presentations that I've made in these sessions, as well as at the OLXD conference in June last year in Lagos, which it was a fantastic privilege to be able to attend. So only a couple of slides. I'm not going to talk for very long. I hoped we could spend most of the session having a discussion. So really, I've got just one or two theoretical models to show you, but honestly, I'm speaking from my own experience here, both as being an internal consultant, but most especially as being an external consultant to most organizations. My name is Oliver Nathan. As mentioned, I work for a company called Africa People Advisory Group. And really the work that we do is so much broader than just learning and development. A lot of the work that we do is primarily up in the continent of Africa. So mostly the work that we do is in East Africa and West Africa, to a lesser extent in Zambia, Zimbabwe, Botswana. But really what we do is provide a range of human resources consulting as well as product-based interventions, of which learning and development and running learning programs is just one. What I did realize is that I haven't shared sound, so I'm going to quickly stop sharing and reshare my screen, but just share it with sound, because I do have a short video that I'd like to play for you towards the end of the session. Generally, in terms of the format of how these presentations or conversations go, if you would like to pop questions into the chat or reserve your questions to the end of the presentation, I think that would be in order, and we can deal with each question as it comes up, and I will try to answer it to the very best of my ability. If you've been following some of the discussions that we've been having over the last about 18 months or so on the OLXD WhatsApp group, or whether it's been in these particular sessions or at the OLXD conference, I've talked really a lot about the difference between learning and development practitioners being order takers versus being solution designers. So a lot of today's presentation is building on that thinking of last year. So you might have heard of this concept before. If you follow someone like Josh Burson on LinkedIn, for example, he talks a lot about what it is that learning and development practitioners need to be doing. He talks a lot about what the learning and development function in businesses need to be doing in terms of transitioning from the current state of being an order taker towards being a solution designer with the line clients that learning and development ought to serve. So it's really about finding ways to serve our line clients more effectively. And so internal consulting skills are absolutely key to really getting down to the bottom of learning how to serve our line clients as effectively as we can. So just a very brief recap. What does it mean when we say learning and development is an order taker? Really what it means is, for many organizations, this is the current state of affairs for learning and development, or human resources more broadly. We are a little bit of a one-stop shop when it comes to everything learning related. So people come to us, line clients come to us, line managers come to us with a training request. And we do our best to scramble around and make sure that we fulfill that training request to the very best of our ability, not really knowing what it is that the line manager wants. And in my experience, training is not necessarily the answer to every training is not the answer for every performance issue or business issue that raises its head. What it means when we say learning and development should be a solution designer is that a big part of our role is really working with line managers and business units to co-discover what the real issues are. Why is that important? Because if we co-discover and dig deeper than the surface of what the presenting issues are, we might find issues in that particular business unit, or that in that particular team, or issues that that line manager has that cannot necessarily be resolved through a learning intervention. So as much as it might be about providing learning interventions, it's also about learning when a learning intervention is not appropriate. And that's what we mean when we say that learning and development ought to be moving towards being an order taker, towards being more of a solution designer. Part of being a solution designer means co-understanding and co-owning the issues and problems that we find with the particular line client in question, but it also potentially means co-creating solutions. So when we look at a particular learning solution, whether that is soft skills related or technical training, whatever it is, it may well be the case that the learning intervention is going to be most optimized. Or what does it mean to optimize? We're going to get the biggest return on our investment. We're going to be able to measure the biggest impact when that solution is co-designed and co-owned between ourselves as learning and development and the line clients that we serve. Not always easy to make this transition between being an order taker, like a waiter at a restaurant, towards being a solution designer. Okay, so that is the basis under which we begin this particular presentation. Last year's thinking that I had was really around building business cases for learning and development. So this might be something that is not really that familiar to you. But if you are in the consulting world, on a daily basis, we are building a business case for the work that we are doing. So can we demonstrate fairly accurately how much a particular solution is going to cost and what the expected return on investment is for clients? Another departure point. The theme of this presentation is really around strategic integration. So how do we integrate what learning and development should be doing into various different business functions? And what is the implication of our efforts to try and get learning and development aligned to what business is trying to achieve? There are several really important implications, some for business and some for the learning and development division, or that HR division more broadly. I think implications for business. If we are able to get learning and development quite well strategically integrated or aligned to what business is trying to achieve, there are several really important implications for business that we can start to consider. We can start to say, if we are well aligned, that we can start to enhance the performance of people in those business units by providing the right types of learning interventions at the right time, measured in the right manner. We can help those business units to become more agile and more adaptable. We can definitely help with cultural alignment. I've just finished a project for a client of ours in Nigeria around putting together culture alignment workshops. It's incredible what learning and development can do for helping and assisting the organization to get a culture project underway and to get people a little bit more aligned around a particular culture project. My interests have spanned beyond learning and development to look at change management in addition to learning and development, and how understanding how learning interventions can form an incredibly important part of any good change management program. We can help people to transition through changes that are happening in the organization by designing learning interventions that might make them feel a lot more held, a lot more like they are being listened to, and give people that platform to be able to air any challenges or any resistance to change that they might be having and help people to navigate through that. What I'm saying is that learning and development practitioners actually have a huge responsibility for the health of people in organizations and for the health of the organization altogether. That is the massively important role that human resources and more broadly learning and development practitioners can, and I'll argue should, play in organizations. It's not just about providing a training solution when we are asked to provide a training solution. Sometimes we are going to be asked to provide X training to Y group of stakeholders in an organization. That is inescapable. My victory for this particular presentation today would be that if you walk away from this presentation, you have a slightly deeper appreciation of the importance of building good and strong relationships with your line clients so that you can develop much more compelling and highly impactful types of learning interventions. To just be mindful. That would be a win for me in this particular presentation. What are the implications for the learning and development function? I think if we are strategically aligned to what the organization is trying to achieve and understanding how an organization is trying to achieve that, whether that is profitability, innovation, whatever it is, if we are able to get aligned behind that, we raise our relevance and our impact in the organization as a department, as a function of the business. What does it mean if we are able to raise our relevance and impact? Well, chances are we're going to be able to get more access to budget to do some of the wonderful things that learning and development can and does do. We've talked a lot as learning and development practitioners about resource allocation. We've talked a lot about skills gap analysis and measuring the effectiveness of our learning and development programs. There's a very good reason why partnership with management is highlighted in red here, because it's that building partnership with management that's going to be absolutely key for us. I say here, learning and development will need to partner more closely with management to ensure that learning initiatives are being aligned with business needs and that managers support the application of learning on the job or learning in the flow of work. I found a fantastic quote on the internet as I was preparing for this particular presentation. It's by a gentleman by the name of Peter Block. Now, we're going to talk a lot about Peter Block's methodology, which is known as flawless consulting. Flawless consulting is the most fantastic methodology for helping us to structure our engagements with line clients. Peter Block says that you are consulting anytime you are trying to change or improve a situation, but you have no direct control over the implementation. Well, what does this mean? There's lots of different ways in which we could interpret this particular quote. But I think for me, what is absolutely key here is that if you look at our sales division in a particular organization, let's just take that as our example. We are not ourselves responsible for the execution of sales, for the implementation of sales. Us as learning and development practitioners are not responsible to make sure that salespeople hit their targets. However, we are able, if we understand the issues and the learning needs well, if we have a good relationship with the leader of that particular sales team or their manager, to be able to understand what the actual challenges and issues are most effectively, then we can begin to have an impact on their ability to be able to execute effectively. I hope that makes sense. It goes back to my initial point that I had about the fact that learning and development practitioners really have a massive responsibility for the health of business and the health of people. It's a huge responsibility. Setting people up for success, as much as the line manager might be really important in determining how successful people are, I think being able to provide the right types of training interventions to specification and at the point at which they need it is absolutely crucial. This is point 2 about building good relationships with our line clients. It's not just about understanding what the issues are from the perspective of our line clients, but it's also about having that relationship in place so that the first person they come to is you. You have that relationship in place so that you can be thinking about what those particular business needs are, that when there is a time for particular learning intervention to roll out, let's say if it's sales effectiveness training, you are able to anticipate those needs and roll that training out rapidly for maximum impact. This is what it means when we say to roll the training out at the point at which it is needed. And in my view, the only way we can do that is if we have that relationship intact with our line clients. That we can start to, over time, anticipate what some of the training needs are as they start to emerge. Just taking a quick sip of water. Okay. I think what is absolutely key to bear in mind here is what it is that learning and development practitioners need to be doing. I've strongly advocated, and I continue to strongly advocate for the idea that learning and development practitioners really need to know what is happening in their context, right? In the context of the organization. If we want to take a seat at business's table, I don't believe it's going to be possible to do that effectively without understanding a little bit about how that particular business makes money or saves money now and into the future. So if I want to be invited in to sit in various discussions around the finance department's table, it means that I need to be able to understand and appreciate a little bit more around what it is that the finance department actually does. What kind of language do they do? What do they use? What are their priorities? So you'll notice here that I'm not asking you to become an accountant. Not at all. I'm asking you to familiarize yourself with the world of your line client. And that comes from having those conversations and taking an interest in what it is that your line client does. So I mentioned in the slide, what's happening in the world of your business? What's happening from a digitalization perspective, a competitiveness perspective? What does the post-pandemic workplace look like? Absolutely critically, to think like a strategist. What does your organization need to stay ahead from a competitive perspective? And then thinking quite clearly, okay, so how is it? What does learning and development actually do to contribute to organizational success? These three questions I've found can help me to get out of the learning and development department, at least in my own head, because I've got a job to do as a learning and development practitioner. I've got all these priorities that come up and people asking me for things, and people asking me to do stuff, and it's priority stuff, and it's positioned as being really urgent. But am I taking some time to think a little bit outside of my own world as a learning and development practitioner? I've found taking a little bit of time to think about maybe what other people's worlds are can really open my mind quite a lot and open me up to having some of those key conversations with my line clients. This is the most fantastic business school diagram you might see. It's the most fantastic business school diagram I've ever seen. It's about a value model, right? I have presented this particular slide before, I think, in one of my previous OLXD presentations. I think, I'm not too sure. I can't quite remember. But really what it lays out for us is the type of thinking that might be able to help us to understand our line client's world a little bit better. This particular value model looks at a business overall. It's any generic business, right? Let's say it's involved in the business of selling product X. And it shows the interlinkages between how this business makes money, covers its costs, develops more products, keeps its customers happy, and hopefully grows over time by making sales. If we are able to understand the business logic of various different departments or divisions in our organizations, we begin to see, okay, so I'm looking at business overall. I'm looking at this as an overall business based on how this business is structured, based on its business model. What do I anticipate might be some of the training that this organization might need? And I can sit with my line client and put together a diagram like this in about 10 minutes. And that's going to give me a really good indication of in what sort of area might I think that there might be challenges, right? So are there challenges with making customers happy? Are there challenges in the actual product sales part? Or is it in development? Is it in developing new products that there are challenges? Are there revenue challenges? That's probably going to give us an indication that there's either an issue in the types of products we are building, or in the quality of what our products do, or in terms of how they're marketed. Then, on the other hand, when we make revenue, we turn that revenue into cash. Are we understanding how optimized our costs might be? You see, I'm not an accountant by any means, but I can take this particular perspective and start to speak the language of business. If I take a diagram like this into a discussion with a line client, I think there's a pretty good chance I'm going to be invited back for a secondary discussion. You see how we're not talking about training here at all. We're actually talking about diagnosis. Diagnosis of what the actual issues are. So not the presenting issues, but digging a little bit deeper. I'm going to give you a structured process to help you with this. I'm sure all of you have heard of an HR business partner. Now, HR business partners, the idea of being an HRBP really comes from, I can't remember that writer's name. His name escapes me now, but it's an incredibly popular way of structuring a human resources department with centers of excellence, with human resources business partners who go out into the business and understand what the people issues are and communicate between the human resources department and the line clients, and then bring information back from the line clients back into the human resources department. And this type of thinking, I think, can be equally applied to learning and development practitioners. The whole point of partnering is fourfold. Number one, it's to establish those collaborative relationships with your line clients. Number two, it's to ensure that attention is given to technical business problems, yes, but also the relationships that you build with those line clients. Number three, absolutely critical, is to go and solve problems, but solve problems in a way that they stay solved. Right? So that's a particular approach to solving problems. We don't want the same problem to rear its head again 6 months after we've solved it. So if we have provided particular learning intervention, or whether it's coaching or mentorship, whatever it is, clearly we have not done a good enough job if the exact same problem rears its head again. So it's not just about solving problems, but it's about the quality of our problem solving. We also want to help to develop client commitment to the work that we are trying to achieve with and for the client. That's a secondary goal of any consulting act. So partnering and consulting, really the words can be used interchangeably. And here I'm talking about internal consulting, internal business partnering. When we solve a problem so that it stays solved, we open ourselves up to developing a longer term commitment from that client to us. We are proving to the client, to the line client, that we can in fact solve the issues that have been presented and that they stay solved. That gets me a seat at business's table. That gets me a seat at the client's table. That means that if finance, and I'll continue to use the example of the finance department. If finance wants to hire another 5 intern accountants, or let's say, whatever, they're going to call me in. If I've solved previous problems for them really effectively, they're going to call me in and they're going to say, Oliver, we've invited you here. This is what we're thinking of doing. What do you think? If we bring them in, what kind of training do you think they'll need? What is your advice and suggestions for onboarding them? Do we need to deviate from our onboarding process? Or if we don't have an onboarding process, can you help us to develop one? Wow, that's going to make me feel good when I get invited back. It's going to make me feel absolutely fantastic. Top of the world. I wanted to talk a little bit about flawless consulting and why it's called flawless consulting. So if you'll remember, I talked a little bit about Peter Block. Peter Block is an American consultant, but he's also an academic, and he has been writing for about 40, I think almost 50 years now on consulting, both external consulting and internal consulting. He has a methodology called flawless consulting. Right? It's a book. There's a few editions of that particular book now. I think if you just had to go onto Amazon, you should be able to find that book without much difficulty. The term flawless does not mean that a consultant can be or should be perfect, right? We're talking about internal consultancy. It does not mean that your engagements with your line clients are going to proceed without any issues either. What flawless does mean is that we are striving for excellence in the consulting process, right? And I'm going to take you through the flawless consulting process. I'm only going to spend about 5 minutes on it. There's a whole book on it. In fact, there are probably thousands of books on what the optimal approaches for doing consulting are, whether that's internal or external consulting. This is just a framework that I've found that's incredibly useful, practical, and in many respects, quite straightforward to help shape my internal consulting, my partnering interventions that I run. This is important. I think for me, the word flawless also refers to me taking quite a disciplined approach when it comes to actually setting up the consulting intervention. Taking quite a disciplined approach in 2 ways. Number one, following what I've learned about the process to the best of my ability. And number 2, and this is where we so often don't get things right. When we run a fantastic process, a fantastic learning program, we build a fantastic relationship with a line client, we don't write that stuff down. We often don't store that information. We don't put it into our standard operating procedure to remind ourselves of what we did, but also to onboard new people into our team in terms of, okay, this is what has worked for me. Maybe this particular approach is one that can work for you. So we so often miss out on the ability to build up our institutional repository of fantastic knowledge that we have gained in the consulting process, in the partnering process itself. I'm not going to take you through this slide. I will provide you with the slides when we are done with this presentation. But flawless consulting is really about, I've mentioned all of these points so far. I'm going to put them into a structure for you. And my hope is that you can walk away from this presentation with an appreciation of where you might be able to start to structure the provision of your services internally in a little bit more of a disciplined and appreciative manner, right? So We've talked about partnerships and the importance of building partnerships. Very, very much about building authenticity, being authentic and having open communications with my line clients. I can't underemphasize this enough. It is crucial to have those clear contracts and agreements in place with my line client around who's going to do what and by when. Even if that's a psychological contract, we want to think quite carefully about contracting with our line clients. And number 4, involving that line client, keeping them actively involved in the diagnosis and the solution design process is absolutely crucial for us. I have 2 anchor slides that I want to share with you, and then I'm going to wrap up. This is my first anchor slide. One of the most important slides in my entire presentation. What do we need to have in place to become a trusted strategic advisor to our line clients? That's what we're trying to do. When we talk about strategic alignment, business partnering, what it means is that we're trying to become a strategic advisor. Number 1, we need to have the business partnering competencies in place. Number 2, we need to be able to apply the collaborative consulting and business partnering process, which I'll show you. Number 3, we need to recognize what our personal power and influence is. Well, what does that mean? We need to have some vigilance and awareness of what our sources of power are, how good we are at conducting conversations. I've already mentioned it. Number 4, how good are your conversations? What kinds of things are you discussing with your line clients? And number 5 is your contracting skills. So how can you walk away from a discussion with clear agreement around who is going to be doing what, when it needs to be done by, and maybe what some of the costs will be. This is at the core of an internal consulting or business partnering process. Whether you are a learning and development practitioner, whether you are an HR, even if you are a management consultant working with an external client, honestly, the process is very, very similar. Now, we're not talking about management here. We're talking about internal consulting and business partnering. Generally speaking, management is responsible for the execution of a particular strategy. I don't know if this is so much about being there when your line client executes on what they've committed to executing on. I believe our role is to help them to achieve that. Our role as learning and development practitioners is to help to set our clients up for success. In my experience, at least. Okay, I'm going to take you through the collaborative business partnering process. This is my second anchor slide. I'm going to play you a short video, and then we're going to open it up for some questions. Let me flash the full slide for you, and then I'll take you through it. In 1 sec, I'm just going to have a quick sip of water before I continue. If you just do a quick Google search on flawless consulting, you should see a model that looks a little bit like this. I've added some additional pieces just based on my experience in terms of what I believe will potentially work well for you. It looks like a linear process, and I'm going to explain it in a linear way. But in reality, we're often jumping between these different stages in the process. When I enter into a relationship with a line client, this is where my business acumen starts to become really important. So who is the client? So this is before we even get to what the client's issues are. I want to know who the client is. First and foremost, what division do they work in? How long have they been at the organization? What is your reading? What is your particular reading of that client? When I have a fair understanding of the client, then I can start to potentially dive into what some of the issues are. So when I've done good entry and contracting, what do we mean by contracting? To say that, okay, I'm going to be the learning and development business partner who's going to be working with you. My intention is to build a long-term relationship with you. So as and when various different issues might raise their head in your particular business department or with your team, just know that I'll be there. I'll be a thinking partner for you. That's what we're talking about when we mean contracting. If we have entered into this particular relationship and we've done some fair contracting, then we can start to jump into discovery around what the issues are. Remember, I said sometimes the issue that is presented to you is not necessarily the core issue that is driving the particular phenomenon that you're trying to solve for, right? So it's only with that good entry and contracting will you be able to, over time, get a little bit deeper into what the actual issues are. And then we can do things like understand, okay, well, who are the stakeholders who are presented with this particular issue? What do we know and what do we not know? What data do we have access to be able to maybe discover and dive into this problem or issue a little bit deeper to try and get to understand, well, maybe what is driving this particular issue? If we feel like we've done good discovery with the client, we can move to the next step in the process, which is around sensing possibilities. We need to understand what possibilities might exist. So, had a look at the data. I've heard what you said with regards to the issues. This is what I believe are the presenting issues, but I'd like to challenge you on A, B, and C, which I believe are deeper, more root cause related issues. And my view as a learning practitioner is if we start to resolve some of the core issues, then the issues as they present themselves will also get solved and they will stay solved. That's how I would conduct a conversation like that. And I'd be brave enough to say, well, this is a particular issue that you have identified. I don't believe that training is the answer for this particular problem. If there's workplace bullying, let's say, for example, I'm not sure that training is going to solve an issue where an employee is being bullied by a line manager in a particular division. There's some other type of intervention that's going to need to take place there. So providing sensitivity training, cultural awareness training is not necessarily going to solve that issue. Sensing the possibilities is putting together what different options we could put on the table to solve a particular issue that has been identified. Let's discuss what those particular options are. Once we've discussed those and fleshed those particular options out, we can choose to act. we can take one or some or none of those particular options and maybe go back to the drawing board and select a new option. But here we choose to act. So we collectively decide to act, right? So myself, learning and development team, and the line client collectively select one or more of the options that we have discussed, and we work towards developing that particular solution and rolling that solution out, right? So working with resistance as a force for change. So this is where another topic that's quite close to my heart exists. And unfortunately, we don't have time. And I know that you have done a session like this on change management and facing up to resistance when undertaking a change project, of which a learning intervention possibly can be. But really, this choice to act is around building that collective decision to act. This is the direction in which we're going in. These are the stakeholders that are affected. This is how much money we're going to need to roll out this particular solution. These are the expected benefits of the solution. And this is the time frame in which we believe this can be completed. And then we go into developing the solution, whether that is something off the learner management system or the LXP that we are going to assign to the learning targets. So that is employees or managers who need to undergo the learning, or if it's building a particular learning intervention or training intervention from scratch, or if it's finding the right external provider to be able to provide that training, right? This is the implementation, the main event, right? This is what we're working to, the main event. And then lastly, and this is the part about recording the journey that is absolutely key to me. So what did we learn in the process? In the internal consulting or business partnering process, what did we learn that we can either hope to repeat for the next one, or maybe that we don't want to do again because maybe it didn't work? Absolutely key that our learnings are documented somewhere. So as much as we, as learning and development practitioners, might be responsible for the development of others, we need to think about our own development as well. We need to reflect on how well the process went with regards to this intervention that we deployed in conjunction with our client. I'm going to say something controversial. Sometimes it's not something that we want to hear, and sometimes it's not something that our line manager wants to hear. And that is the notion of slow, slow, fast. It's going to take time to do the entry and contracting, the discovery, the sensing possibilities, and the choice to act. That is going to take time. The execution, once we have chosen to act, the execution of the particular solution can take time, can take place quite rapidly. But it's going to take time to do that entry and contracting, especially if it's for the first time with a new client, a new line client. But as you go through the process, entry and contracting, discovery, sensing possibilities, and choosing to act becomes a lot quicker. I'm going to show you a very quick video, and I'm going to wrap up my presentation here. The short 1-minute video of Peter Block talking about how dangerous urgency can be. And here he's referring to particularly being super urgent to rush through the entry and contracting, discovery, and sensing possibilities phases. Let me play the video.
tricky things about contracting is the instinct to be helpful sometimes isn't helpful. And people want an answer. Everybody wants a turnkey operation. I got a question. Tell me what to do. Tell me what to do with these people. Tell me what to do with the system. Tell me what to do with my life. And that urgency for an answer is the problem. Because if urgency for an answer was useful, they'd have done it by now. People say, oh, this has been going on for years. We've got to do something right now. So I know that if we do something right now, we'll do the same thing we did yesterday and the day before and the day before. So my willingness to be controlled by urgency is a mistake every time. Not because I am against urgency, it's just it's not helpful.
Very short video. A very short video talking about how easy it is to slip into the trap. When our client says something is urgent, it would do us well to take a few moments to actually sit with our client and start to process why this was urgent. As Peter Block said, if it was so urgent, it would have been resolved by now already. So yes, on the one hand, it might be urgent to resolve this issue, but clearly the approach that has been applied up to this date has not solved the issue. And for me, that is a way into having a discussion, particularly with a difficult client. Clearly, what has been done so far is not working. So I would like us to sit and have a discussion about what other possibilities might exist to help you to solve this particular issue. And we can do that in a very respectful manner. Being a learning and development practitioner is sometimes not a job for those faint of heart. It can get hectic. It can get difficult. Sometimes we are faced with really difficult line clients. If there's one thing that you can walk away from this particular presentation with is, I would say, just take that 10 to 15 minutes to step back and think about what your approach will be before you enter into an engagement with a line client. That's what I've done, and I found that it has been incredibly helpful, particularly when I'm feeling pressurized, is to just take that 10 minutes to myself, maybe get out a piece of paper and a pen, and plot my thinking down. Just reflect a little bit on what my process has been for providing solutions to my line clients is. And so when I go into that initial discussion with my line clients, chances are I've maybe thought about, try to anticipate maybe some of the issues that might be going on for this client. And I can hopefully slow the conversation down just a little bit so that it's not frantic and we can start to get down to building our relationship and unveiling and unearthing the real issues that might be going on. Why do we do that? So that when it comes to deploying a solution, we solve a problem and that problem stays solved. Number two is when we have successfully executed on the particular intervention that we are running, we open up our spreadsheet or wherever it is that we're storing the information, and we reflect a little bit on how that internal consulting intervention went, what went well, and maybe what I will do differently next time. And with that, that brings me to the end of my presentation.